Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at Element 3D version 1.6. So not too long ago we released version 1.5 and it had a lot of great features like animated OBJ sequences, glow with chromatic diffraction, and some other great options. And today we have an equally exciting update in Element 3D version 1.6. So let's jump right in and take a look at some of the new features. The first feature we're going to take a look at is in this cheesy example of Air Force One cruising through the Alps for some type of vacation, I'm sure. One of the things I like to do is combine Element 3D with particles. So I'm using some trap code particular here, and Element 3D is rendering our airplane. Now, if we come up here, I've got some particles. And just they're streaming off the end of the wing there. Let me shut off the motion blur here. So one of the challenges of working with Element 3D is placing other effects on the surface of 3D objects. For example, if I wanted to place a particle system on the tail wing or maybe some fire coming off the back of the airplane, I need to know exactly where that point is in 3D space. So I could, maneuver the camera around a bit and, maybe switch to some side views to try to find the exact cross section. But that takes time, and nobody has time. So we've implemented a new feature in version 1.6 to find the exact position of any 3D surface. So let's come down to our Element 3D layer. And here's where we have our airplane, and we'll hide some of these effects. Now we'll open up the element effect, and we'll scroll down, and we see an option called Utilities. And inside we have a new feature called Generate 3D Position. So if we take the 2D position, select anywhere on our model, we can generate a 3D position null. So now we have a null object at exactly that 3D position. So we can scale it and see it fits right on that surface. And we can do this as much as we want. So we can select another surface, click generate, maybe a wing null right there. All right, so very handy indeed, although maybe not so much for the pilot of this airplane. All right, let's go and take a look at another new feature. Here we've got a jet flying by, and it's looking pretty cool, but what if this jet also had some missiles that could shoot off? Well, let's go and take a look at an example here. So I've got this jet, and I want to attach another missile that I can maybe animate firing off of the wing. What I could do is I could come down here to the element layer, open up the scene setup, and we have our jet here, and we'll scroll down. We want to add a missile. So we have our projectile weapons pack, and let's scroll down to the bottom here, and we've got like a Sidewinder missile. So we'll select that, maybe adjust the material a little bit, bring the specular down, and maybe the diffuse color so it's a little darker. And let's put this on to group number 2. So we'll take it off group 1, put it on group 2, and hit OK. All right, so this is going to be one heck of a payload, assuming the pilot is alive. But let's come over here to group 2, and what we could do is we could adjust the particle replicator position. So we can move it, slide it over, and try to align it to the wing, scale it down in the particle look, and position it where we want. Now, another thing I like to do is create a null object and then parent the position value to that null object, and that way you can move it around in the comp view. But instead of doing it manually, we have a new option under Group Utilities for each group to create a group null object. So we can open this up, we can create one, we can delete it, and we can unlink it. Now I'm going to go ahead, reset my group, then I'm going to click on Create Group Null. So you can see we have a new null object. We'll go ahead, we'll set this to yellow, and now we can adjust the position of this missile right in the comp view. So we can rotate it, we can move it over, we can even scale it down and position it exactly where we want. Now we can even use the 2D to 3D point generator. So we could say generate a position, let's see, let's put it right under the wing. So let's create a position right there, generate. So now we have a null object. Take that position, hit P, and we're going to copy that position, edit, copy, and we'll take the group null with our missile, hit P, select position, and choose Edit, Paste. So now our missile has been moved right into that location, and then we can just move it down a little bit, maybe scale it so it matches that other missile. So now let's go and name this. So we'll hit return. We'll just call this missile. Now, the other thing we could do is take our jet, which is on group 1, and also create a group null. So now we've got a group null for the jet. So we'll hit return. We'll call this jet. And let's say I want to animate the jet. So I want to have it like rolling and doing all this cool stuff. Well, the missile no longer follows it. So that's not good. Well, what we can do is parent the missile to the jet. And now we can move the jet around and the missile will stay connected to it. All right, now let's go and move on to some more exciting features like the world position pass. So let's take a look at this train example. Here I have the train from the Explosive Training series. Got a big hole in it. And it looks pretty good, but I want to add some fire. I want this to look, like it's exploding. So let's come over here to the project. And I've got this element from Action Essentials called Big Fire number 3. So I'm going to bring it out into the comp. All right, so it's a 2D layer. So let's make our fire a 3D layer. And we'll hit AA and turn off Accept Lights. So now it's a 3D layer, but it's not intersecting in 3D space. And that's because Element has its own 3D space different from the After Effects 3D space. So this is kind of a common problem with 3D aware plugins, but Element 3D has the solution. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to duplicate the Element 3D train layer. So we'll choose Edit, Duplicate. And I'm going to place this above the big fire. Then I'm going to go up to the effects and we're going to come down here to the output. We're going to set the show output to world position. Okay, so now we have this black and white matte. So what can we do with this? Well, let's come down here and take a look at some of the options. Right now, we're looking at the matte output of the world position pass. We can do some cool things. We can rotate this matte and we can move the position of the matte. And the cool thing is no matter where the camera is, the matte will always stay in place. Let's go and undo that. I'm going to set the feather amount to 20. All right, check this out. We're going to select our fire layer and set the track matte to Luma Inverted Matte. So check it out. The fire is now intersecting with our 3D train model in After Effects 3D space. So this is very, very cool. Now, if we go back to the world position matte, we can control some of the options. For example, we could turn up the feather amount. So this is going to change how much blending we see between the layers. We can take the fire and we can move it around, and it's just going to intersect perfectly with this model. All right, so everything's looking pretty good here, right? We're looking at our 3D obscuration, and then we go over to the backside, and then all of a sudden, everything is just messed up. It's kind of inverted or something. Well, if we look at the matte, we can see that everything looks pretty normal here, but because we're now behind it, the matte should be inverted. So what we've done is added an option to the matte controls to invert from the back. So if we turn that on, what's going to happen is the matte is going to automatically switch as you cross that plane. So if we turn that on, you can see it happening here. So this is pretty handy, but we didn't stop there. We've got a couple of other cool features. So we've got the feather amount, right? So we can feather this, but notice how it feathers off into negative space. Well, what we can do is change the expansion, slide that back over so that the feathering kind of happens right in the middle. So that way things like this fire blend really nicely. And just a quick compositing tip. So here's our matte, right? Well, we can actually add a fractal noise onto our matte layer, set the blending mode to color dodge, and what you'll see here is a little bit of noise in that overlapping area. So if we scale this down a little bit, you can kind of see a little fractal noise. We can play around with the contrast. So if you look closely, you can see the fire is a little bit more rugged and not just perfectly smooth. So you can kind of see the difference here. And of course, you can play around with the brightness to shift the position of the matte. So just kind of a handy feature for fire and organic type of effects. Now, coming back to the world position pass, we've got another handy utility to create a world position null. So what is a world position null and what can we use it for? Well, you see our fire layer here? If I move the position of the fire, I haven't moved the position of the mat. So now we're out of sync. We don't want that. Instead, what we want to do is generate a world position null. Click on create. So now we have our world position mat. So we'll just make this yellow and we'll rename it here. And this is the position where the mat is. So if we look at it just by itself, we can move this around. So this is kind of cool. We can rotate it. Now check this out. We're going to shut off the world position pass and parent the world position null to the fire layer. So now if I move my fire layer around, you'll see that it perfectly intersects wherever it goes, including rotation. You know, I can take the fire, I can scale it down, you know, move it so it's kind of coming out of this little hole in the back here. And there we go. We've got some great looking fire, and it looks like it's coming right out of this hole. This is really the power of the world position pass, but what are we missing? We're missing some light. So let's take the utility to create the 3D position, and we'll generate a null, right? Make it yellow. And then let's just create a new point light. So we'll make it, you know, orange, like the color of the fire. And let's put it into the position of this null. So we can try to move it there. Or we can just take the position of this null, hit P, select the position, copy it, and then paste it into the light. So now the light is exactly right by the fire. We can turn the intensity of this up. Maybe move it out a little bit further here. There we go. So now we've got a little bit of interactive lighting from the fire. And we can even take this light, we can name it fire, and let's also parent this to the fire layer. So now if we move the fire around, the light is going to move with it, but definitely a cool way to work. Okay, let's take a look at another scenario to use the world position pass. So we've got these chess pieces here, and I want to put some particular particles in the middle of the game piece. So we'll turn on the particular layer, and we'll scroll through here, and the problem is the layers are not obscuring correctly. So what we'll do is create a world position pass. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is I've got some fake floor reflections on, and basically what I did is just used a couple copies of elements. So I've got the floor, then I added the reflection, the upside down pieces, and then I added the pieces on top. So not real reflections, but close enough. Now I've got another copy of Element 3D here, and this is just a normal copy. What I'm going to do is make sure it's right above my particular layer, and I'm going to set it to World Position Pass. So just like before, we've created this nice world position. So what I'll do is take the particular layer and set the track mat to Luma Inverted. Now, the way to think about the mat is, if we bring up the options here, whatever you want to have in front. So the pieces here, we want them to be in front of the particular layer. So what we want to do is rotate the mat until only those pieces are selected. So what we might do is set this to 90 degrees, maybe bring the feather amount down, and even turn up the expansion a little bit. So now the white pieces are in front. So then we'll shut this off, and right away, we've got the particular layer is now being obscured. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, but what happens if we rotate the camera to the other side? Well, first, I'm going to take my particular layer, and I'm just going to lower the particle count just so this can speed up a little bit faster. Just turn it up so that'll render a little faster. And what I'll do is I'll bring the camera around to the back side, and oh, it's all messed up again. What do we do? What do we do? Well, we can't use the same trick as before because the particles are not a flat layer. They have volume. They have three-dimensional volume. So what are we going to do? Well, let's go to our new matte layer, and there's an option called Face Camera. So if we turn that on, the matte is going to rotate towards the camera. So if we shut the rotation off and then choose Invert Matte, now as we rotate around, the matte is going to update so that the white is always in front. So if we take a look, the particles are behind the pieces. We come over to the side here, we come over to the back, and the particles are also behind the pieces. So now we're getting an accurate obscuration from all around the chess pieces. Let's go and take a look at one last scenario with the world position pass. So I've got this jet and some particular smoke, and we'll just turn these two layers on. So right now they're not intersecting correctly. The particles are just rendering on top. So I've created a world position pass already, and I'm going to scroll down, and I just need to rotate it, and then I'm going to move it to the back here, maybe feather it a little bit. Basically, I just want to create a little bit of feathering at the back. Then I'll take our particles and set the track matte to Luma Inverted. So now the smoke's going to render behind the jet. So this looks pretty good, but what happens when we come behind the smoke? All right, we've got another problem here. So the matte's inverted. We can click on our world position pass, come down here to the matte options. Now we could try the invert from back, but that's not going to work because the particles have volume. They're not a flat layer like the fire layer from earlier. So instead we have this other option called invisibility. And what we want to do is make the matte invisible from back. So if we turn that on, you're going to see the particles are now fully rendering from the back side. And if we go to the front side, they're now rendering behind. So this should work for a lot of scenarios. Now, here's the tricky part is once we get to the side here, this is when we're going to start to see things fade out. If you take a look at this example, same type of thing. We've got the particles are going to fade on just at this point. So we're going to see the matte, everything's all good. Then when we get behind it, it's going to fade out to allow the particles to render over the car. All right, so that's a lot of matte situations, but what kind of fun things can we do with the world position pass? Well, we've created sort of a elevation fog or kind of a haze that rises up. Let's take a look at this. Let's break this down. So we've got a single element 3D layer and it's got some fog on. So we turned on some fog in the render settings. So we can turn that off and see what that looks like. So we've got these basic mountains. We've added a background layer. Then we added some fog, so it gives us a little more depth. And then we added another layer that has this sort of 3D haze. So if we shut off the first two layers, we can kind of see what this looks like. It's very interesting looking, first of all. And what it is a duplicate copy. So what I'll do is I'll just delete this layer so I can show you how to do this yourself. So we've got our mountains inside of Element 3D. So we've just got this elevation map with some displacement. And we've imported it into Element 3D. And now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer. So I'll choose Duplicate. And then we're going to go to the output and set it to World Position. But don't worry, we're not going to do any more mattes. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here. We're going to rotate the matte a little bit so that it's flat. So we'll set it to 90 degrees. Then we're going to move the position of the matte down. So check this out. I slide it down. So this is pretty cool. What we can do is set the transfer mode to screen. And then we're going to add a color correction tint, and we'll tint it a little bit of blue, for example. And let's get rid of that curves effect. So if we look at this, we've just got some blue tint that we're putting on top. And so this kind of looks like a little bit of haze. So let's go and refine this. Let's bring the feather amount down, and let's bring the position of it back up. So it's very cool. It's kind of like an elevation effect that only affects everything up to a certain point. We can also add our own curves adjustment to make the fall off a little bit more natural. We can tweak the settings here a little bit, change the color, whatever. But the nice thing is it's fully three-dimensional. So anywhere we move, we're still going to see that nice kind of fall off. So this is looking pretty good. And the other thing I did is I took a couple elements from Action Essentials 2 basically some atmospheric elements, just some, smoke machine kind of elements, and place them in 3D space just to give it a little bit more distinction in the beginning so that we can tell that we're looking at some kind of fog or haze. And of course, always be thinking of new creative ways to use these features to solve your own technical problems while working with Element 3D. Okay, let's go and take a look at another fun feature. This is called planar mapping. So we take a look at this animation. You can see we have some cool things going on, sort of this cascading effect. Well, what I've done is I've taken this gradient image and I've mapped it along the surface of the balls. So let's go and take a look at how this is set up. What I'll do is select our Element 3D layer. Now, I've taken our gradient and I've selected it as a custom texture map inside of the element dropdown. So we've selected the gradient layer. And what that allows us to do is access it from inside the scene setup. So click on that. And here we have our ball with our texture. Now, I'll go ahead and just delete this and show you what I did. So I went down to my primitives and I selected an HD ball, so sphere HD. And for the material, I set the color to black and turn up the reflectivity a little bit, as well as the Fresnel. So we've got this nice black material. Then for the illumination map, I've set the texture. So instead of loading a texture, I'm going to use the custom layer number 1 called gradient. Hit OK. Then we're going to scroll down and turn the illumination up to 100. So now we've got this nice looking texture. I can hit OK and we can take a look. Now, if we click on the object, this is where you'll see the new feature. Basically, under model and surface mapping, but now we've got a few new options like planar and polygon. Let's come over here to a more complex object like a sound and music object. So let's just pick some headphones here. It's my favorite model to use for whatever reason. And instead of using this material, I'm going to use our new material that we just created. So we'll drop that on our headphones. So this looks pretty messed up. The UVs are not going to help us. So what we'll do is click on the object, scroll down and change the texture mapping to plane XY. So what this does is makes the texture two-dimensional. So one of the things we can do is turn up the repeat amount. So we can turn that to 2, for example. And this creates a really interesting look. We can change the offset. Another interesting thing is that it works on all types of models. So for example, the Metropolitan Pack, right, has a bunch of cities and buildings. Well, we can load up a really complex model of a city. And instead of using all these city textures, we can just take our new material, drop it on there, right? Now this is going to look a little funky at first, but once you set the texture mapping to plane XY, you're going to have this sort of interesting look here. So let's set the UV repeat amount up to like 3. So we get some nice detail. We'll hit OK. And let me just move back here. And I'm just going to go ahead and reset the group. So now we have our little mini city here. Maybe we add a little bit of contrast. So then as we animate through time, we get this kind of funky color effect. So definitely some fun things that you could do with this. Here's another fun feature we added to the animation engine. So you can see we've got this nice cascading animation effect that happens circularly. So it happens around this shape. And here's another example. We've got kind of like a domino type of effect. So this is a pretty simple animation. They both only have 2 keyframes. Let me go and show you how this is set up. Basically, I've got a fresh copy of Element here with a simple plate. And I'm going to go inside of Group 1 and set the replicator to a ring. And we'll turn up the particle count. And let's turn the particle look size down. So particle size, scale it down. And right now we can do some fun stuff. So we can rotate them. We can even change the rotation point. So right now they're rotating around the middle, but we can go inside of the scene setup. And if we turn the grid on here, we can see the anchor point is right in the middle. But we can change that and set it to, say, the bottom. So now the anchor point is on the bottom, and we'll hit OK. So now if we rotate this, I'm going to rotate around the bottom point. Now, all of this is already in version 1.5, but what's new in version 1.6 is the ability to animate sequentially. So real quick, we'll go into the scene setup. I want to go ahead and put this onto group 1 and group 2 so we can use the animation engine. We'll hit OK. And let me take group 1, copy all the settings by hitting copy, go to group 2, and paste all the settings. So then if we go to group 2, we can we can move these up and maybe go to the particle look and rotate them or something, just to give it some variation. So then if we come down here to, first of all, let's go to the render settings and turn on a little ambient occlusion, just so this looks a little better. Turn on the illumination influence down to 0, since the material has a little bit of an illumination. Okay. Just give it a little more depth there. Nice. So that's an unrelated step. But we'll go into the animation engine, turn it on, enable it. So what I want to do is keyframe the animation from 0 to 100. And as I do that, we're going to see the particles animate from one state to the next. So already this is pretty cool. We could turn the motion blur on, we could speed up the animation, bring the keyframes closer together, and we get a cool sweeping kind of animation. But this particular animation is happening from right to left. So it's happening from right to left. Now if we come down here to the animation engine options, we can control that. So here we have our smoothness. We can tighten that up and make it quick. Or we can, randomize it a bit. So that's really cool. Turn this back up to like 50. But one of the things that you could not do before is animate them sequentially in order of the particle count. So what I'm going to do is set the animation type to shape order. So when you do that, now we're getting an animation that happens sequentially. So we can turn the smoothness down, and now we get a... There's definitely some cool things that you could do with it, some cool animations. You can also change the shape order offset, so change what particle starts. The domino effect is kind of the same thing. They're all rotated forward, and kind of just creates sort of a fake domino effect. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Element 3D version 1.6 is a free upgrade. We've really been working hard to try to find better ways to work with Element 3D, and hopefully the World Position Pass and some of the other great new features will help you along your journey. My name is Andrew Kramer. Thank you again for watching, and we will see you next time.